Hi guys, Luton here, welcome back to Below the Line. So this week's Below the Line, I first want to talk about some changes to the format. Now don't worry, it will be brief-ish for me. So last week I asked you guys if you thought this series format needed a shake-up, because I felt for a while the format didn't really feel quite right, for a couple of reasons. However, this series was always about the comments first, but the comments can't exist without the topic. So when you think about it, really neither of those takes more importance. Now sometimes people comment saying that they think the video title is misleading because it's always the title of the topic which comes as the second part of the show, and I can totally understand that. Now the results are in and you guys voted that you see the format as it currently sits working. However, with that said, I personally didn't expect that result because for me, I actually think having the video title about the topic and then the topic coming first in the video makes a lot more sense. Now, hear me out. Some people suggested, why don't I, for example, briefly mention the topic at the beginning of the video before I go into the comments and then bring the topic up at the end as we do now. For me, that idea is not a good one because I think then what's going to happen is likely people are just going to watch that moment, comment, and then leave the video without listening to the topic or the other stuff as well. However, I suppose you could argue that they might be the kind of person who's just not even going to listen to the topic at all. They're just going to read the title and then leave a comment based off of that, and I've seen that as well. So here's the next thing. When it comes to finding the topic, I always timestamp in the pinned comment where people can skip ahead to find it. So again, I'm sure some people come in and then they just jump ahead to that topic, but that's fine. That's why that's there. So here's my conclusion. I held the vote because I was curious about what people thought about the format. I was surprised because people liked it as it currently was, which I didn't expect. It's felt to me a bit disjointed for a while, and I think that as with most things, structuring a video a certain way makes actually little difference to people's behavior when you really think about it, or at least it's very difficult to determine if it really makes any true difference, because ultimately they're either going to comment without watching, they're going to watch the whole thing, or they're going to skip to the part that they specifically want. So what I think is actually more important is that for new people coming in, as some of you guys have said, they might come in and are probably more likely to stay if the format is straightforward to understand. So title, come in, talking about that, and then comments on the previous topic. So that's what I want to try for a bit. I want to try the title as topic, which it always has been, but then maybe have a bracketed discussion title for the comments reading. Then in the video we'll have the topic first, we'll have the comments second format. And this makes most sense to me, and I don't think it's going to affect people's viewing habits significantly. So if you find this outrageous and you hate it, tell me in the comments. If you think it makes sense, tell me that as well. I hope you guys don't think that I'm completely ignoring the poll that I did. I'm not. I see that and I'm well aware of how people went, but personally for me, I hope you will listen to what I've said and agree that it makes a bit of logical sense. We'll try it. If people dislike it, we'll just go back to this format, no problem. I think, as I say, that makes the most sense to me. So with that said, let's deal with today's topic. And the topic we're dealing with today is early access. Is the concept just too flawed at this point to deserve widespread support? That is to say, should people start turning their back on supporting early access, or is it worth it for the few gems that have come along? Subnautica recently was released. Apparently, it's full release. It's been early access since December 2014, and after 4 years, it was ready. Question is today, is it ready? Is it finished? Or did the devs just ship it and sign off on it out of embarrassment that it took so long and still was not really polished? The game engine seems to create shocking amounts of graphical pop-in for players with no setting to adjust in-game draw distance. It's something they've addressed, they've said they wanted to fix, and that's been the case for a long time now. Any quick search around on Google will discover many threads showing and discussing that this is an issue for many people. It's not related to spec, it's not related to settings, it's not related to SSD or hard drive setups. It is some issue with the game. There's also mechanics and generally things in the game that just feel unfinished and often just really clunky and not intuitive at all, where it feels the devs just kind of half thought about it and then just moved on. For example, I found that when building your base structure, for example, support legs for modules just appear and disappear almost at random. You have no control over it. It seems like the kind of graphics kind of refresh and update just whenever they feel like it, leaving your base extremely triggering, and every time you make an adaptation, something's going to change beyond your control. Fitting windows into your base, it works mostly, but sometimes you have to kind of swim outside to fix it. The whole thing feels like it's still just in alpha. On top of this, other things like extremely low resolution vehicle interiors, the game crashes randomly, and your character often just gets stuck when trying to move around inside almost any internal area, which in 2018 for a game at its full release is just completely unacceptable. With that said, the game is beautiful and imaginative, and it has a wonderful take on underwater exploration experience. There's nothing else really like it, so it is enjoyable, but albeit with a ton of frustration along the way. And it's a real shame because this game has massive amounts of potential, and it has loads of potential to inspire other games which could try to do the same kind of thing in the same kind of world, because it's really nice when you get a game comes along which steps out of some of the standard default formats of games that we have. But the question stands, do we actively turn away from early access if it's delivering games full of issues 4 years down the line? This has always been the case with early access, and why some people just straight out don't think that early access is a good concept at all. Should Steam start to more actively monitor things? That seems hardly likely to happen. I guess what we're really asking is, do games like Subnautica, that after such a very, very long time seem to have made little progress in really realising a finished state, does that turn you off from wanting to support other early access projects? Which is in and of itself a good reason to make sure that early access projects do deliver what they say they're going to, because if it damages the concept and the reputation of early access as a process, that could be harmful to other games which actually do want to stick really hard and deliver the content that they've said they were going to. Or perhaps you just want to stick to the tried and trusted system of judging upcoming games based on devs' previous work, as you would always have done. What projects have they done before, and use that then to inform yourself. So you can tell me in the comments your thoughts about this, about early access, about Subnautica, about monitoring, about generally how this whole thing should be perceived, viewed, and maybe acted upon. So now we come to part 2 of Below the Line, where strangely this week I'm going to be looking at the comments from last week's video where we were discussing what do you want to see in ARMA 4. Now, understandably, there was a lot of discussion. In fact, there was over 400 comments, and unbelievably, you guys will be surprised that I actually went through all of those comments. Now, the thing was, obviously there was a lot of repetition, there's a lot of core mentions of things in ARMA that a lot of people want. What I have tried to do is I tried to pick a selection of comments which were to the point about things we know we want, and comments which selected and made very, very good mentions of ideas, concepts, things that somebody might want to see in the game. Maybe some stuff that we know is probably unlikely, but it's still just kind of interesting to imagine and think about. So, with that said, let's go through all of the comments. This is going to be a bit longer today because there was a lot of stuff, but there's a lot of good stuff. First up, Danger Zone. This is not a big shocker. Frames, frames, frames. I think it would be fair to say that a large amount of comments mentioned this, and I think it's fair to say that we all are well aware of this fact. I will come back to mentioning this in other comments, but I think, yes, I think Bohemia are well aware of this. I think we know the fact that they're going to change the engine will make a big difference to this. It is the core thing which needs to be fixed with ARMA. ARMA is playable to a point. It has severe limitations on what you can do at certain times, and it impacts on basically everything in the game. Now, there were a lot of passionate comments, a lot of long comments as well. This is actually one of the shorter ones from Demon Grenade. Says, for the next game, I'd like to see more features focused on immersion. There are plenty of features focused around simulation, but ARMA isn't very immersive. I think people would debate around that a little bit, but I get where you're going towards. He says, I'd like to see more dynamic cosmetic details like uniforms getting wet in the rain, muddy from crawling in mud, battered and torn from combat, blood that acts somewhat realistically from wounds, not just every limb getting a red paint job upon death. Makes me think of games like that we see upcoming like Scum, where they recently demonstrated the water effects in Scum, where when you go into water, your actual uniform gets heavy and so on and so on, so that's like a really cool thing. Also from rain, your uniform gets wet from rain, it weighs you down, you move more slowly. He says, I'd like to see more different animations for different factions. Militiamen don't have perfect military posture when they aim, weapons in one hand when sprinting, Red Orchestra style, stuff like that. More realistic dialogue between AI when on the battlefield, like soldiers bitching about suppressing fire or sprawling and screaming in agony when severely wounded. Maybe nearby AI try to shut them up or calm them down until the medic can get to them. AI dialogue needs to be more than just information and callouts. More destructible environment effects. A lot of people mentioned about this, unsurprisingly. A mix between Battlefield and Far Cry's fire effects to help sell the intense combat of chaos and open warfare. I really think destruction is a big focus for modern games now. Just Battlefield started it all off, and now it's just necessary. It's just necessary to really bring you into a game world. And finally, the ability to easily create entirely new maps in the editor. By this I mean the ability to control terrain generation, texturing, plus all the current features all in one. He says says, that's everything I like to see. I know it's a lot, but even if they made just some of it, that'd go a long way towards immersion. I think the terrain editing stuff is something I'm going to come back to separately on another video. But then Demon's not done. No. He says, one thing I'm going to add to this wish list is a reworking of the AI. It doesn't necessarily need to be smarter, but the systems behind them need to be more efficient. Again, this was a very common comment from a lot of people. What I mean by this is basically they need to add a director system to manage platoon squad team behavior. From what I understand, the AI currently works via a complicated system of finite state machines to define its decision making. Think of it as a large list of if-then statements. For example, if shot at, go prone. If disturbed detected, switch from safe to alert status, etc. While this method can be effective and can make the AI very robust, it's extremely inefficient and is prone to bug out if the AI encounters something that isn't defined in the FSMs. And I think that's true, because very often you'll see them, they just kind of stop, or they won't behave, or they won't follow orders, and it also means there's no kind of... It's very predictable, which leads to so many people metering the game constantly. He says a director system could help manage group behaviors and simplify FSMs when the AI are not in teams or when they need to act on their own accord. With a director system dictating how a squad acts, the AI do not need FSMs coded to tell them how to react in relation to everybody else. They need to worry about themselves and follow the commands of that director. Now, the director acts kind of like an omnipresent strategy AI that is assessing what the squad's overall objective is and how each member should be acting. When in combat, the director is going to tell the AI where to go and what action to perform when they get there. The rest is left to an individual unit who follows those directives while still having some FSMs to ensure they have some sense of self-preservation. So, for example, if the director says to an AI to take cover at a tree, and right before the AI gets to there, a grenade lands at the tree, the AI's self-preservation would take priority over and then move to avoid the grenade instead of just going to that tree. In short, it removes the need to code scenarios where the AI has to be aware of the state of his teammate's status as well as his own before deciding what to do. With a director, he's going to be completely oblivious to his teammates' existence, but will appear to be working directly with them. He says also use a system for the AI that's similar to the systems used in Fear and Killzone. They achieve the same goal as ARMA's AI do, albeit on a smaller scale, but do it much more efficiently in both terms of reaction and time to code. This has been like a really good example of some of the comments we had on this video. There's a lot of very well thought out, interesting ideas throughout this whole thing, and as I said, I was quite shocked to see 400 comments. It just shows how much interest people have in the development and just kind of conceptualization of the game. Chief says, if one would say Zeus in ARMA 3 was Bohemia putting their toes in the water, I want them to leap into the water for ARMA 4. ARMA is a community-driven platform. If Bohemia plops a plethora of tools right on your lap from the start, that's just a win for everybody. I see a lot of people in the comment section just saying optimization, and that's fine, it's a sensible direction to go, but it makes me wonder if ARMA still retained its gameplay and sandbox elements yet dialed back on its higher end graphics, moving on to a new style that's less taxy on somebody's rig. Would the core ARMA community still play? I don't want the devs to games just to be more accessible by dumbing down the gameplay, so how about just making your games more accessible on a hardware standpoint? And I think, again, the evolution of Zeus is something to get into on an entirely different video. It also goes hand in hand with the ease and just straightforwardness of people being able to set up their own servers and run them in a basic way that I mentioned. I think that for the game to really truly move forward into the next one, it does need to be more accessible. People should be able to just rent or start up a server, and that's basically it. They should be able to choose like a Zeus scenario, choose maps, choose to be a Zeus command, drop different puts in, add mods more easily. The whole thing just needs to be much more modular, much more straightforward, and just very accessible to everybody to get on board with. Okay, next up, Aaron Horner says, I think ARMA 4 should have a more in-depth ballistic system as well as a better medical system. They should make something like Ace 3 part of the main game. Obviously, frames should be a priority, but they need to focus on the immersion side of it as well. I personally don't care what time era it's set in, as long as mod developers can still make mods for the next ARMA, because that modding community is what makes ARMA 3 so good. Another thing that would be super cool is destructible environments, so that units could blow holes in walls, for example. This is the kind of comment that I got a lot of, and it points towards just, I would say, the generic things that people really want to see in the game. So better improvement optimization, frames, just adding in the stuff that people feel should be already there, all these kind of things. They're just really a staple of what people want to see in the next game. That is important. It shouldn't just be dismissed out of hand as like, oh yeah, people always say that. It's important because it shows what people need, what people want. Bohemia need to listen to this, and they actually need to take these things on board. Right, it's your friend of mine, it's Ezan. He says, thinking about ARMA 4, I doubt there'll be a single player campaign, seeing that ARMA is 95% played as a multiplayer platform. I can see something like single player multiplayer scenarios like we do have in ARMA 3. Going into all the game modes that are now available: Exile, ARMA Life, Wasteland, King of the Hill, INA. Implementation and maybe liberation. Implementation in the base game for all of these would be insanely helpful. Basically, you download a server command program setting and you just tick boxes for what you want to run. For example, game mode, the map, the difficulty, easy, medium, hard, restart every 6 hours, done vanilla INA in a few minutes. Obviously you need a dedicated server though still to run this. Yeah, 100%. Going on to Zeus, and especially the interface, I love to be able to do what I can do in Eden Editor in the Zeus interface. People forget that Zeus is a bird's eye view and UI overlay that gives you access to everything the game has been loaded up with. Adjusting objects placement in Zeus is quite frankly infuriating, and I think everybody can agree, so having the flexibility from the 3D editor would bring tears of joy. Mods in many respects are 60 to 70% of why ARMA has survived for so long. Due to this, mods will have a lot better support, because in my eyes if they don't, the game will be dead before launch. A better system allocation. I know this is a general issue with the engine that they use, but I have a high-end system, i7 5820K, 32GB of RAM, 1080 Ti running the game from its own 500GB SSD, but I'll still hit 20 FPS in Kavala with more than 20 AI. This is exactly why things need to change. Other things that I'd like to drop in are smoother animations, better voice over IP, integrated radio mod for more advanced gameplay, ACE3 CBA should be embedded in game and activated, deactivated on the menu screen, Armor 3 maps in Armor 4, please. I think in general as well there's a lot of scope for map expansion and the ability to create your own maps. That's something which really should be built in as a something which is functional and working for the community from day one. Right, buckle up guys, because there's a lot on this one. Albert Einstein says, of course there's some of the obvious stuff. It needs a new engine that's actually capable of supporting a game like ARMA. The graphics should be 4K with nice shaders, got to run on 60 FPS at least for high-end machines, but here is a bit more of an in-depth wish list. So general stuff, Africa would be a pretty nice location. I really want to see a civil war scenario with the major forces only playing in the background and probably a little showdown between them at the end for the epicness. The time should be set now or in the near future again, preferably now. I don't want to see a game based in the 20th century again, but that's just because I personally don't like it. Also, I think the modern style fits ARMA. I want Armor 4 to not have a clear villainous side like CSAT and Armor 3. There should be aspects for every side of the player to experience, so you can find out that just like in the real world, there's no real wrong side, and there are reasons for every action. If the engine can handle it, I'd throw out the choose by scroll wheel concept and rather let the player interact with things he's pointing at, like looking directly at a door handle to open a door. What would be just fantastic, looking at wounded body parts of a soldier to get options to treat them. That does kind of exist in mods already, and I'm not too sure whether that would be a great system. All of some of the options I listed to make the game more difficult, like the ACE stuff, should be option in the settings to still make the game enjoyable to all audiences, so basically mod implementation. Full VR support with the possibility of further expansion to be able to implement things like gun controllers in the future. That would be pretty cool. 3D models for everything, no more full screen optics tank interiors. For tactics, more focus should be laid on communication. It should be only possible to reach the goals by communicating with one another. This actually means stepping back a bit. The drones should be less capable so that they don't just take out everything so infantry has to walk around. Also, it should be clear that things like laser guided bombs cost a fortune and therefore are assets you shouldn't just use on everything. If a soldier is killed, his map should be accessible by enemy soldiers who can then see positions marked on it. If it's not taken by one of the fallen comrades first, then the commander is going to give the single soldier any necessary information, giving a feeling of confusion like is the case in real war. As for the AI, a clear command structure should be implemented for players. That means the commands might send recon units into an area to give them a clear picture before sending in the troops, or even deciding the situation too dangerous, waiting for a better opportunity. Sabotage operations at enemy base, recon can be placed, faulty ammo or fill water into vehicle tanks, anything should be possible. In the actual fight and upgrade over our current medical system, it doesn't have to be like ACE, but it'll have to be way more complex than this one is. Overheating barrels on machine guns would also be nice. With this implemented, the squad leaders would have to be more careful on when to use assets like machine guns. Again, this is the case with, say, squad right now. Jams would be a nice addition. That's in as well, of course, modded already. It'd be, of course, a bit annoying, but the players would be forced to have a plan B when doing stuff like room clearance. A more realistic wounding system that has the character feel the pain in the area where they were hit. This means they can still run quite well when shot in the arm, but shooting is going to be a hell of a lot more difficult. Blood loss, when wounds stay untreated, the character starts to get weaker, probably even gets hallucinations. Also, he leaves a blood trail. Dogs. Imagine how cool it would be to have dogs that can help you with clearing rooms or bringing down smaller threats without having to use lethal force all the time. Also, they could sniff out people, follow their previously mentioned blood trails. Night vision goggles should give a smaller field of view, should actually give you worse vision, not just a green filter. G-forces should have an effect on the pilot. they kind of do. Probably not as bad as in Ace mod, but it should be rolling, pulling completely back and rolling back. A realistic repair model. Some damage can be repaired by soldiers. For some, a dedicated repair vehicle's got to come. Some can't be fixed. This would give the engineer class a bit more appeal. If that kind of does exist already. If they actually go for Civil War theme, we would need a crowd control measures like pepper spraying, ADS, friendly fire with lock-on missiles. At the moment, the launcher magically knows if the infrared signature is friendly or not. This makes friendly fire with those launchers almost impossible. Well, I don't know about that. Taking responsibility off the operator. Vehicle problems. A seagull could get sucked into the engine. A tire could burst, or a helicopter just breaks down. Who knows? Free movement inside larger vehicles. Reverse thrust for airplanes. Nothing more annoying than to get stuck in a hangar. For AI, of course, the AI needs quite an update. Driving skills have to improve dramatically. Also, the new engine should be used to make it more intelligent. The AI should have a simulated command structure. They should act as a unit that's controlled by a central command. They should have at least a primitive understanding of tactics, and the commanders can use drones, other stuff, get a better picture of the situation and react appropriately. AI should not see through the goddamn grass. Camouflage that makes sense. At that moment, we have ghillies just for the looks. AI doesn't care what you wear. Again, you can get this working some different ways. This has the example to lead medics on a world using civilian medical outfits, so less likely to get killed by friendly fire. I might actually be responsible for starting this. If the camo you picked actually made sense, people would have to think about where they're going to go and picking camo that fits. For the environment, weather that actually influences tactics, so if it's too windy, helicopters are going to struggle and snipers are basically useless. CAS can't operate properly at night. Stuff like bombs, suicide bombers, mines are an actual threat, no minefields shown on the map. Well, again, you can get that working, it's just another a setting you got to sort out. Ambushes by civilians, more realistic sounds like echo and louder, fuller weapon and vehicle sounds. Again, you can kind of get that through different mods. Not only better, but more textures like multiple types of the same road, different areas that can be sandy or wet. Civilians react to actions set by soldiers. If the unit is always set to shooting people, they might sympathize with an enemy. Would be incredibly cool for long-running servers, because let's face it, if a guy is telling you actions have consequences, it's not going to change anything. As you might have noticed, this has gone way out of hand, and these are not even all the things, but I still would like some of them. The others, also many of the things listed rely on an engine powerful enough to handle them, so it might not be realistic. Basically, the reason I wanted to include this section of comments was because this is a good example of how I think developers often feel, because they see someone and they're really passionate about the game, they've got loads of ideas and things. There's a lot of stuff in there which can be done if you have some more knowledge. So basically, people that are running a server, there's a lot of things like, for example, setting up the minefields. Those are often server settings, which might not be implemented on one server. There's ways of getting these things done already in ARMA. There's also a lot of stuff there mentioned which is already existing in mods. So the question becomes, how much will they implement in the next game that's inspired by mods? You know, and as I mentioned previously, what happens then in terms of conflicting with people wanting to make new mods and so on and so on and so on. So it gets a very difficult grey area of how much do you implement. Also, there's a lot of things in there which, as I say, they're nice to imagine, but they're just totally unrealistic. You know, for example, like pouring water into an engine and then it doesn't work. Like, I can imagine that you could make that work, but just the amount of times where that would be specifically able to actually be relevant and functioning and actually have an effect in the gameplay is so minimal that the time spent in order to make it work is just not worthwhile. And so there's a lot of things in there which are like cool ideas, and you think like, oh yeah, that would be cool, but just in terms of realistically bothering to actually implement that and put it into the game, it's just not worthwhile. Also, you've always got to be really careful with games like this, and it happens when you do missions as well. You have to be really careful of how far do you go realistically, because people always are like, oh, I want this to be just like real life, and we should have to do this. There's one thing you got to remember, is that when people are playing games, there is a very niche percentage of people who want to play to a very, very high level of realism to that level. So essentially, you might want to be able to have that capability, but in the scheme of things, like how many people really, truly want to spend like 2 hours getting intel on a mission before they even start to fight? Do you know what I mean? And it's that kind of thing. Not everybody wants to do that, and so you can't sort of overly emphasize that or overly make that a strong mechanic to the point where nobody else gets to play other than doing it that way, because then what happens is you just kind of, you know, dissuade other people from wanting to play. So it's a very, very fine balance. It's a very, very difficult balance, but it's important to just be aware, like I say, that, you know, everybody has ideas out there, and some people have a lot of ideas, but you've got to kind of really scale it in and be realistic about, you know, just what's feasible in the game, and you've got to consider other people that want to play the game as well, not just how you want it to be. But Unhappy Troll is in and says, most actual problems of ARMA now are to do with the old engine, lots of legacy code, bugs and memory leaks, hence poor performance of AI of the client and server alike. It can't be fixed. Don't forget, ARMA is a byproduct of VBS, so a new engine will be utilized on that project first, and only after that might there be a simplified version of it in the form of a game. So VBS is obviously like a military simulation software. Also, there's no point to do something new in this area. Most stable engines, more intelligent AI will require more resources of a client and server computers. Don't forget an anti-cheat, because game logic can't rely on server computing. Hence, a hackfest like ARMA 2 was and will be a disaster, and that means more processing time on memory scans. No new revolutionary weapon has been fielded yet, so the tactics aren't going to change significantly. What's left then? Rumored ability to make any place of an Earth into a battlefield? I don't believe that because of reasons. Yeah, I don't believe that that thing is ever going to happen either. So I think what we'll see in the new ARMA is going to be in less than 4 to 5 years. Not really a lot of point to discuss it right now. I would actually disagree on that, because game development often takes place way, way further ahead than you might imagine, and I guarantee that they will already be thinking and discussing and probably talking about ideas. It's exactly the right time to be talking about it, because what you want to be doing is talking about it now, not in 4 years' time where they've kind of fleshed out ideas and started to lock it down and go, right, now we need to actually get in and crack on with making this thing. Right, time periods. Someone says, I hope the next ARMA is modern warfare, but not futuristic. Linus replied and said, hopefully it would be great if they do an alternate history, a modern war or something. They should add some really cool big maps, a bit of variety in them, like desert, woodland, snow, not only one style of map 3 times. That would give many buildings to new mappers as well. Also, I'd like a really good co-op campaign. I'm sure they'll have that. Mark C says it won't. The reason 3 is going to be licensing costs. You can do a search for it. They said it was because companies like Boeing and others started going after companies to pay for use of weapons in a game. They're a small company, they couldn't afford any of that. And that is something I think people are often unaware of, and why it gets left to kind of modding and so on, these licensing issues which kind of restrict them from actually implementing these real things into the game, which is a real shame. Mousy says, the thing I want to see in the next ARMA game is the need for, or at least a way to add, a logistical backbone. It's a huge part of war that is never shown or even respected, but the transport of information, supplies and manpower to a base in ARMA 3, all your transportation needs are done by a helicopter, and unless you use the advanced flight model, even anti-aircraft guns can be dodged easily if you know what you're doing. Right now it takes hours in order to simulate one logistics chain, and it's pointless to do so when you can just strap on a magic box to a little bird, and now everybody has enough weaponry. They could even ask for their Christmas list. Perhaps the answer needs to go back in time to World War I, Korean War, Cold War. World War II has been done to death. Well, Cold War, I was surprised when people bring up the Cold War, because it's like, do you understand what the Cold War is? Do you know what I mean? But anyway, not everyone who plays ARMA 3 is looking for milsim either. Just look at the success of Squad. So in order to be more accommodating to a wider, more combat-focused audience, I think having more jump in and out game modes where you can just start having fun right away with people. Yeah, it's true. And they did try to do that in ARMA 3 a little bit, but didn't really work, did it? It says, as strange as it might sound, I would like less focus on the everyman infantry. Warfare is about combined arms. And I think that having campaigns or scenarios, being able to experience a different role would be incredible. There's a lot of parts to the Vietnam War, for example, in an infantry strike pilots tacticians, being able to call in that aid or be that aid is only something you can experience with milsim groups or a dozen hours to try and make it work yourself. Making it easier, I think more than a dozen hours, to set up such things is very important, but unlike Squad, the combat isn't organic, and a lot of people give up trying to make it play that way. So let's narrow it down. In ARMA 4, I'd really like to see more accessibility through smaller PvP game modes and also a co-op campaign that doesn't take dozens of hours of preparation to get it working. Let more players experience the game without needing to commit hours of dedicated work, but instead about making it fun and let them say, I did that, I helped in this, and be proud of themselves without needing to be part of large communities. I would also like to be better logistics simulation, or at least a better way to prepare that. ARMA's done so much respect toward the military, except in this one area, information, weapons, resources, vehicles, all people need to get somewhere, so giving the people that they want to experience that part of warfare should have that option. And lastly, the time period. I think that going back in time is an interesting choice. It's just hard to say how far back. Napoleonic era is interesting, but I think people would only have the tolerance of World War I firearms at the earliest. The only thing I don't wish to see is another World War II game, unless it can do something to stand out from the crowd. Now here's the trouble that you have, right? I've seen a lot of comments about this, especially in ARMA, because there is a frustration with players in ARMA where players want the best of both worlds. What they want is they want to get the experience of being in like a large group of people who have to organize and set everything up, but without all the time and effort and downtime associated with doing that. And the simple answer is you can't have the best of both worlds, right? If you want to experience logistics chains, if you want to experience getting in on the ground with people, doing big operations with people, you have to invest your own time. There's no way around it. They can't just make somehow I mean, in terms of, I suppose, yeah, single player campaigns, but again, that's where the ability for people in ARMA to be able to make single player missions comes in. Like, if you want to, you can learn about how to make single player missions, and then you can make single player missions, upload them to Steam, people can play them. So you could make one which is all about logistics, and only about logistics, if you wanted to do that. You can do anything you want. That's the whole point of a sandbox system. And when it comes to people saying like, oh, I want to play in with this group, I want to play in with that group, big groups, whether it be Zeus or just milsim groups doing PvP or PvE or whatever, those big groups, they require your time and your attendance, because if you don't have your time and their attendance, the whole thing doesn't function. So there's no kind of like quick fix, you know, and this is where a lot of these groups don't have a lot of tolerance for people who want to just show up and play, because it, quite simply, there's no other way of saying it, it just doesn't work any other way. You know, if you need to be there, you need to participate, you get out of it what you put into it. If you put your time into it, you get out of it that enjoyable gameplay experience. But you can't just turn up and then just get the best and then you log out. You know, it just doesn't work like that. And the reason I'm talking about this now is because I see this a lot, and I might even make a separate video just saying like, hey, you know, if you're interested in joining in like a big group like this, there's too much logistics, there's too much planning, there's too much time associated with these things. You can't just turn up and play. It just doesn't work like that. Mr. Vardhan says, so I've been thinking about ARMA 4 for quite some time, and I came to a few realistic ideas. I'll start off with single player and the campaign. For me, the East Wing campaign was an amazing single player experience, and the implementation of shady characters and special forces such as Miller and the CTRG really kept me going through the campaign, trying to figure out what's going on and uncover the truth about them. With all the optional missions that you could do in the campaign as part of scouting the campaign, itself gave me a hefty amount of playtime. In terms of the general era, I think BI should stick with ARMA 3's era, and the campaign should actually be a sequel to Eastwind and Apex Protocol. I strongly believe that the near future is much better than the present day, as many are saying, because near future, as it is in ARMA 3, is practically a canvas for Bohemia to paint on using what we have in the present day. In ARMA 3, pretty much everything that people are calling futuristic is already in development as prototypes or actually in active service. So I definitely want them to stick to the timeline and expand upon it. Now, some of the functional features that would potentially be implemented are already in ARMA 3 with mods. First of all, stuff like vaulting, climbing, jumping, or similar. We already have it with enhanced movement, and I'm sure BI would implement it in a very nice fashion. Are you sure? Are you sure about that? This one is a must. One thing that I dislike about ARMA is character movement and animations. Some of them feel really clunky, and I think the overall character movement, animations, and physics need to be more natural and fluid. A big thing that the community would appreciate would be the Eden editor for multiple people, similar to Zeus, with all the features of Eden and the ability to save. We all know AI in ARMA can sometimes be amazing and sometimes be dumb, so having AI feel more natural and not see through vegetation, for example, is definitely on the wish list. A thing that I would like to mention are also the terrains. The main terrain in ARMA 4 should be much larger than Altis, and possibly with some more variety in terms of the terrain itself and the biome. In that regard, I praise Bolivia and Ghost Recon's Wildlands. Another thing that the terrain should have would be some larger cities like Georgetown and Tanoa. I feel like towns and urban areas in ARMA 3 feel boring, and they should really feel more like somebody's actually living there or has lived there. In that regard, Tanoa is great, but Altis and Stratus suck. One thing that's definitely on the wish list as well is a bit more realistic with the building destruction. Again, it'd be very nice to have something similar to Battlefield. Not going to happen, because building a wall destruction is awesome. I also feel like vanilla ARMA 4 should have extended weather like snowfall, snowstorm, sandstorm, and similar, which we already have in ARMA 3 with scripts and mods. Also, it'd be nice to have some fluid water like rivers, but at least ponds like in ARMA 2 would be nice. The last thing we've got to mention are graphics and performance. Again, of course, in terms of graphics, ARMA 3 is already beautiful, but with room to do even better. One thing definitely would be to work on a character head models and faces. They need a little bit of love. Some things I'd like to do in them are rain, puddles, textures for wet clothes and weapons. Again, mud, crawling similar to BF1. In terms of performance, ARMA 3 is fairly okay if you know how the game works. Again, it's not acceptable. ARMA 4's engine will be in Fusion, and this is where we start to get people talking about this, of something based off of it. I think performance would be much nicer than it is. I'm pretty certain that will be the case. We can all wish and speculate about what BI would bring into ARMA 4, but I'm sure they're going to do a good job. Just do whatever they do. They have to keep the community as the soul of ARMA, just like they did with ARMA 3, of course, and that is the true thing about having a sandbox franchise, I suppose. Right, Little Lego's got a personal wish list for us. Again, I don't normally like putting wish lists in a lot, but this works quite well for this stuff. So, personal wish list for ARMA 4, believable game world, easy and effective civilian and fauna placement. Civilians do interact with each other, some do have jobs and things, they should act like real humans, not everyone is friendly to allies, sometimes civilians do have information about enemy locations. Better interior decoration. better controls, removing the mouse wheel menu, more organised, more effective controls like in modern shooters, better AI, smarter AI, simple to set up AI artillery, cash, troop transport. AI can rearm and heal themselves. AI should drive way better than in Arma 3, yes. Better and more effective AI command. Dynamic and better battles. As per the mod Alive, they should be an AI commando who commands squads, platoons, logistics. A morale system. If enemy force is losing too many troops, they're going to flee, call for support or extraction. That's something I've talked about for ages. Weapon change-ups. Usable knives, repeating rifles, static weapons, advanced ballistics. Vehicles. Naval vehicles. Ability to connect a trailer to vehicles such as howitzers. Vehicles should behave differently when driving on dirt and sand. Sometimes they can get stuck. Animation when getting in and leaving vehicles. Ability to fast rope out of helicopters. Yeah, and actually do it. Advanced flight models should be default in Arma 4. No. Better vehicle damage system. Special forces equipment. Drones, robots which can do certain things like defusing IEDs. Kind of do have that. Flashbangs. Modern equipment to scout buildings. Base building environment manipulation. Ability to build outposts, temporary radio towers, trenches. Again, there's some mods. Ability to build barricades to barricade windows, doors, streets. That'd be cool. Adding vehicles which can manipulate terrain. The manipulation and barricading stuff could work if it was done very simply and straightforward. Better terrain and building destruction. As it says, for example, if a big bomb hits near a house, there should be a big hole, clutter everywhere. Again, you know, everybody wants better optimization, better performance, better frames, and then they're like, yeah, you should be able to like level a town. And we are not even done. Building currency resources can be used as a framework for other mods. Mission, for example, iron vines on maps or money. Better movement, ability to climb and jump. With the correct equipment you can rappel. Logistics, ability to transport vehicles, crates. Yeah. Mods should be in Arma 4 by default. Ace 3, Ace 2 or Task Force Radio. We'll come to that also, like when I do my video. Different stuff. Is it possible maybe VR support? Yeah. Better animations, better inventory, more FPS. Walking vehicle interiors, better character customization. That's my huge list to make Arma the best game ever made. One thing I will say, the Arma community are a lot more optimistic than I gave them credit for. There is a lot of ideas coming forward of things I'm just like, wow, these guys have a huge amount of faith in Bohemia. Right, Gagrin wants just one thing to make Arma 4 better. Weather affecting the nature of crossing terrain both on foot and by vehicles. Mud, basically. That's gonna be super hard to implement. I mean, when you think about it, think of something like spin tires and how that works. Now, I've actually said this before. I've said, like, imagine if you had, like, spin tires, but in Arma. It would be amazing. It would be really cool. It would be amazing if it affected not only yourself, but civilian. Like, if they made mud a thing, like mud and water and all these kind of things, like actually a thing, where it got really, really down and down. I mean, it'd be like no FPS game or any kind of shooter game ever made. You know, because being able to run around mud, get stuck onto you, weighs you down. It's going to be like something out of like Seven Samurai or some terrible World War I film. You know, it's just going to be like nothing you've ever seen before. I mean, it's exciting to imagine if it were feasible, but I just can't imagine it would be feasible in terms of getting the game running properly, in terms of frames and optimization, all this kind of stuff, and just making it work, and potentially even like making it enjoyable. It's one of those things, it sounds really cool, but imagine if literally everywhere you went to and everything that you did was limited based around that factor. It's a huge ask, and like I say, it's one of those things that's nice to imagine, but I don't think the technology is there yet to be able to do that, and do that in a way which is feasible without having huge drains on the system resources for people. Traitor says, I agree with the ease of hosting. It's a bit of a nightmare to get everybody to do the exact same thing and just to get access to a friend's game. My teams use Evolve HQ, however, they're having issues with making sure it works for everybody. What I would like to see is something a little bit simpler. Also have headcams, team leaders having to rely on UAVs for communication just to know where everybody is and what they're doing can be a little bit annoying. Again, that depends on your own team's communication. I feel that using a portable UAV style terminal to view headcams would be a nice touch. That is a mod already. You could open it up, click the player you want to see, and either help them navigate, point out. Again, it's a mod. Even some more detailed commands. Another thing I could do is allow direct communication to the person you're viewing through a kind of earpiece. I'd also like to see some sort of nose art for a more customized vehicle unit. Oftentimes in the older days of military you could find artwork on a vehicle, pin-ups. This often gave personality to that vehicle, made it feel a bit more part of the unit. Obviously there is a way to do that now. I just think it'd be nice to see built into the game itself. Yeah, again, as with often is the case, there's a lot of mods out there and it would always be cool to see them in there, but yep, it is what it is. Soula comes in and says there's too many things I want from ARMA 4 to be very specific about it. I completely agree that hosting needs to be simplified quite a bit. I've been playing ARMA titles on and off since Operation Flashpoint, but only recently we really hit it with a friend around last autumn or so, and we realised that the way we're doing things is very limiting, and we really need to run the server environment as a dedicated setup, even if it was ran from a player's own computer. When we're working on this, it got clear fairly fast that correctly setting up proper dedicated server is full of all kinds of insanity. It is. People that know how to do it, but if you don't know how to do it, you're fucked. Like, it's very, very tricky to get this stuff up and running if you don't have any clue of what you're doing. Outside of that and replacing SQF with something sensible, I'd rather see a lot more modular and expandable ARMA 4 than what ARMA 3 is. While ARMA's come a long way from its days earlier, ARMA 3 has done the same thing on its own too. There are still a lot of details that are hard-coded and can't be changed through modding at all. Something I recently talked about with my friend was about having your friend load your launcher while you keep your aim steady. This apparently can be done with ACE, but it's slower than loading the launcher yourself due to hard limitations from ARMA. This is actually listed in ACE bug reports. Also, weapon configuration and expandability was greatly improved from ARMA 2, and I'd like it if they further develop this, especially after playing something like Escape from Tarkov a bit now, but that's just expanding from what we've already done. I'd love if they properly expanded this for vehicles as well, natively being able to fit your helicopter, APC, IFV or whatever with suitable configuration during an operation would be awesome. They kind of have implemented that now. For example, taking an AM7 Marshall and its real-life counterpart, Patriot AMV, is fairly modular by design, can be kitted for different situations that might be time-consuming in real life, but it can still be done. Apparently UAE fitted some of their AMVs with BMP3 towers, and you have possibilities with Amos and Nemo. Really have to see some modular touches on vehicles overall natively. And of course, obviously on top of that, previous features. Unfortunately, all that and the new stuff that they may or may not get put into it will add to development time and costs, so I'm not sure if I can think about having to see ARMA 4 within this decade. And to be clear on the server hosting and setup, like I say, I'll probably talk about it, more in another video, maybe discuss with a few other people as well. But basically, what I said on the previous video was people should be able to very straightforwardly set up a Zeus scenario or any kind of multiplayer scenario, which is you buy a server, it's already implemented with the stuff you need, you just choose a map selection which is already loaded up, and then you maybe you can throw mods in very easily, you can just plug and play. It should be plug and play. It should be straightforward for people to just get in and play missions and shoot and do shit without having to have like an entire server structure and have loads of admins and basically do it in a huge group. You should be able to do it with groups of like 10 to 20 friends, just get together, have a Discord, just play some missions and just do that. That's what would make the game really accessible. That's what would make the game really successful. Right now, that accessibility wall is what stops people from getting in and why they have to join big groups and stuff. That's not a necessarily bad thing on its own, but it just stops the kind of freedom of enjoyment, which I think really, really can be there with this game, but they got to try and work it out. Garus says, to be honest, I don't expect BI to jump back to a past period of time. Modern and near future areas offer too much opportunity for the multiple roles that can be supported in an ARMA game. BI also use assets and tech from a modern and near future era as well for their military purposed simulations. But as it's more fun to play Make-A-Wish game, I say that I'd prefer something out of the 1960s and 80s. That would offer a lot of modern tech, tanks, jets, helicopters to play around with and still lack some of the OP assets like drones, laser-guided missiles, heat vision, super fancy special forces stuff, etc. Plus, the Cold War background offers an interesting setting for the game's missions. Yeah, again, but it's still it has to be alternate reality because Cold War is Cold War. Gameplay-wise, I think giving weather more importance would be a great addition to the ARMA series. Rain could create slippery, underground or muddy fields like we've talked about that would make it more difficult to move forward, or imagine your vision being affected by the water running down your windscreen wipers. Let's even go so far that snowing could change the landscape overall by building up piles of snow. I think it should add various new aspects that had to be kept in mind when planning strategies. Also, I'd love the AI to react differently to different camouflages. I always disliked the AI shooting at enemy units which were actually equipped with the same uniform as their own, or making no difference between flashy coloured clothing and camouflage when spotting enemies. Fixing this would add a little bit more realism. Last but not least, here's a quiet personal wish. As I've stepped into modding for ARMA, I wish BI would enhance their modding tools drastically. It feels like a constant struggle to work with the current tools. ARMA owes a lot of its longevity to all those great mods out there, and therefore putting time and effort into the development of more user-friendly tools should pay off for BI in the end. Kyle says, I'd like to see a more in-depth Zeus system that gives you a lot more control over the scenario and AI. 100% agree. Currently within vanilla Zeus, there's only so much you can do, thus you get Ares and Achilles expansion, which gives you a lot more options to choose from, even create better scenarios, as well as giving more direct orders to AI and such with Seek and Destroy. I'd also appreciate better AI, as currently even with their skill set to max, players can breeze through an AI mission without much trouble. I agree on that too, if they're competent with ARMA. To have the AI have a better pathfinding system, as well as for them to be able to take more direct orders and act more like a player, or at least a bit more competent, would be extremely helpful, as in ARMA 3 quite frequently the AI will break, stop responding, take either complicated or frustratingly stupid actions. It'd also be helpful if, when remote controlling the AI, didn't act like a UAV, thus preventing you from doing some actions that a normal player would be able to, such as using turrets properly or even using other UAVs. All of that is very true. It's worth remembering that ARMA Zeus was kind of like an afterthought. It was like a DLC. It was something which got implemented after the game was out. And, you know, it's something which I think is really expanded upon. And I've often said before that I think Zeus, or the ability to kind of, you know, game master games, is really something that not only ARMA but other FPS should be taking forward as well, because it enables just a huge variation of exciting possibilities for players. Right, next up, Jimbo's got a good list for us. Things I want to see in ARMA 4, good question. Firstly, there are the obvious things like better performance optimization, but it's most likely going to be the top of a lot of people's lists. But there are other things that I want to see, and I'll try to keep each one as short as possible. So, smarter AI, more control over AI as Zeus, yep. Weather-related physics, such as in the rain, you get heavier and get wet. Mud, gusts of wind, again, you can see a lot of people on the same page. Fire and its ability to spread. I didn't see anybody else mention this at all. That's a really cool idea. More reactive controls, as they can be clunky at times. Turning mods on and off from the main menu a lot easier. A variety of mods, which is part of people's game nowadays, implemented as part of the core game. Advanced medical, better communication, advanced movement. A lot of people want this. Updated mods from all previous ARMA games and the original Operation Flashpoint in the game available for multiplayer. More gore, so gibbing basically, or jibbing. A few splats of blood, just don't do it for me. Improved ragdoll physics. Better armor simulation. Never seen a shell bounce off armor regardless of the angle that it gets hit at. More customization of weapons and equipment instead of having several of the same bag or gun, but just, you know, different colors. Let me choose its color after I've chosen what it is that I'm going to take. Improved stealth, more gear, more noise, more variety of models for NPCs and players, women, children, civs, some sort of naval support other than carriers and tiny little boats, implement a command system where a commander can direct AI squads without being part of that squad. Basic construction, have the ability to move out from the main base and set up fobs would be awesome. Melee combat, better stamina system, improved logistics system for rearming troops in the field, better destruction, not having a tank drive over a wall and the wall falls over, or probably more likely the tank flips 100 meters into the sky. Lastly for today, Cobbler, also with a bit of a list. He says, insert optimization, better online play functionality, fix the goddamn broken system where a tiny bump sends a tank in the air, like I just said, better AI, yada yada yada. Would like something alternate history where the Op4 faction are like the Germans of World War II, but in the modern age. I like that CSAT weren't that low tech, but I think people were turned off by the idea that Iran got these futuristic gear, which also didn't add that much. Like the helmets looking advanced with the visors, but they didn't offer any functionality. I wouldn't mind if it was America versus some other European federation like in Tom Clancy's End War. If not, I'm fine with the 70s, 80s Cold War. I don't see a modern setting by Bohemia being beneficial, as it would mean we'd lose interesting settings like 2035 something else. Modders can easily add the modern setting later, as they did with ARMA 3, and fewer modders would put in the effort to do something futuristic that's actually fleshed out. An action dialogue wheel instead of the current menu where you have to scroll up and down to pick commands. Even Dragon Rising had this. Death animations and ragdolls are just awful in ARMA 3. They jerk around like they're being possessed when they get hit. Their bodies contort as if their bones have been vanished. It just doesn't feel very satisfying to hit anybody as they flop to the ground. Half-Life 2 had a better ragdoll, and that game came out in 2004. ARMA 2 and DayZ have scripted death animations, which, yeah, a little bit stiff, but I'll take them over ARMA 3's god-awful ragdolls. The ability to duck while manning turrets. Yeah, being able to duck your head while behind a gun, while manning a static turret in a bunker or manning a Humvee MG leaves you vulnerable. I know Bohemia did a shortcut by making turrets manned electronically, but it might be nostalgic, but I just missed the direct manning of turrets on stuff like Humvees. Not every battle has to end with the AI's death. It'd be really interesting if you had more varied casualties. How interesting would it be if the AI soldiers could be fatally wounded or even surrender? They kind of can be. Understandably, the wounded enemy soldiers dying on the battlefield might be a bit controversial. I wonder how many players would just gun down wounded soldiers lying on the ground. Yeah, I mean, that's basically every mission we ever do is war crimes all over the place. As for surrendering, yeah, if a whole squad is down to a few soldiers low on ammo, outnumbered, they should have the chance to surrender. and that's the best thing about Zeus. Move to the Infusion engine. They pretty much have said that they're going to do this, I believe. It seems like this engine they're using for DayZ has far better performance. It's easy to code. It's compatible with the ARMA 3 engine, thus maybe compatible with mods too. It looks a bit more smooth to play. There's rumours they might even already be transitioning ARMA 3 to Infusion. Hopefully at least ARMA 4 should use that. More and more customization, more and better customization. Stuff like the Arsenal's a good step. Hopefully it's expanded and easier to customize and change the loadouts. Yeah, because it's still a glitchy nightmare, to be honest. Dying and losing all the gear and swag you got really sucks. Take cues from games like Squad, which has a pretty slick movement system with some visceral, tight combat and the ability to build fortifications. Further expand on Zeus. It's an amazing idea. It's got a lot of potential to expand further on, and I can see tons of YouTubers, streamers creating more player-driven stories with intense, wacky moments. I guess a few things from DayZ could be interesting, like equipment damage, say a bullet lands on your weapon or it took some shrapnel damage. That's a cool idea. The option to turn on some survival mechanics like having to sleep, eat, drink again as an option. That would be really cool too. So tons and tons and tons of great ideas here, guys. It was very, very interesting to read through them all, and I think it just shows how an interesting a topic it is. It also just shows how many people still are very, very invested in the game, even after all the time now since this game came out. And I think the other interesting thing to see is how not all of them, there's a huge amount of focus, yeah, on, say, we want frames, we want better graphics, we want better AI. These are the staple things that everybody talks about, that everybody knows they want to exist. But as I said in the last video, it's great to hear people's ideas about other things, other ideas they can put in. Some realistic, some not realistic, some possible, some unlikely, you know, so it's very, very cool. It'd be interesting to see. I will link this video to people that I know at Bohemia and just let them have a read through, and maybe we'll talk about this further down the line, where I ask you guys more specifically, more in depth about certain points, you know, when, like, let's talk about weapons. What weapons do you want to see? Designs, or, you know, functionality. Let's talk about vehicles. Let's talk about map building. Let's talk about fire spreading. Let's talk about destruction. Let's talk about AI. Break it down. You know, there's so many different areas you could focus on in kind of conceptualizing and speculating and having ideas about what you could do for the future. And I think sometimes it's a very nice thing. It's a very fun thing to speculate and think about, because it just gets people's imagination going. And that's what games are all really about. And that's what ARMA's about, it's what Zeus is about. It's getting people's imaginations involved and thinking, like, what's the possibilities? What can we do here? How could this happen? And believe it or not, it is a good idea, because sometimes if enough people are talking about a concept, devs are aware. Devs do read things, they do watch videos, they do listen to the community. And if enough people are talking about a thing, and it's not just frames, 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 this is the thing. It's like sometimes it's great to talk about how you want frames. I'm pretty certain that they know that that's a thing. So let's not just talk about that, let's talk about all the other stuff as well. Thanks for watching, guys, and as always, I hope you enjoyed the formatting of Below the Line. I'll probably keep it the same for the next couple of videos. We'll see where we are then. Thanks for watching as always. If you enjoyed, drop a like. I'll see you next time for some more Below the Line.